Megan. We're giving it just a few more minutes, see who all logs in.
Oh, just making some tea.
What are you doing, Megan? Oh, that's tea.
Making some tea.
Thought you were, I don't know what I thought. I thought maybe you had a cat and you were like, come on, get it.
No, I don't know about y'all. It's 3:30 where I am, 3:30 Central. And like 3 o'clock, I hit the wall. Like I need some tea or a cookie will also be great if I get a cookie. I have some trail mix. I need something at 3 o'clock every day.
Right.
Same.
Take a walk.
Same. Liz feels me. You take a walk, you're so healthy. I'm like, give me a chocolate chip cookie.
Well, yeah, that's good.
I want to hear from your Midwest and West Coast, us East Coasters. Everything you guys schedule you think's early in the day is afternoon for me.
Right? Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, we can go ahead and get started. First, just wanted to introduce our guest today, Anthony White. How are you doing, Anthony?
Howdy.
So today's conversation was around social equality and just the conversations that we're having right now with Black Lives Matter, with racism, what that looks like, and what some of the things we can do. And we'll start with Anthony just introducing himself, telling us a little bit about his business, what he's got going on, and then we'll move into what got us here today. Anthony, take it away. Tell us about yourself.
My name is Anthony. I'm part of our ALC. I'm the chair of our culture committee. I've been selling real estate for 4 years. I've been with Keller Williams for 2 years. And some change. Great decision. What else did you ask?
That's fine. Just a little bit. What size of your business? You're a single agent?
Yeah, I'm a single agent. It's me and my assistant, sometimes me short assistants. I'm also a real estate investor. So we kind of play with both of those ways. But my business is mostly, actually it's like 90% my sphere of influence and referrals. That's the majority of how we work. We try to take care of our clients at a high level. We've done, I should have done the math on my board. I think we're somewhere around 3 million so far this year, even with the COVID stuff going on, and even with that, we're very solutions oriented. So I project we'll easily be well over that for the second half.
Yeah, so Anthony has an impressive business and big goals and big dreams, which is one of the reasons I liked having the conversation with him and where he's going, just his point of view. And I had the opportunity to partner with him in a coaching relationship, is where I met him and learned about this. And it was, I think we decided it was the beginning of June. And Anthony had put a post on Facebook, all right? And that post was around just offering that if you don't know what to say or if you have questions, a safe space to have a conversation about the racism, about social equality and Black Lives Matter, right? To have an area where you could ask questions with no judgment. And that weighed heavy on me. I reached out to Anthony, particularly everyone in my sphere, right? Just to make sure everyone was okay, where were they at, and if there was anything I could do to help. And Anthony and I talked prior to this being scheduled, right, when we're talking about this. And I told him, I said, it was a challenge for me because I didn't know what to say either. And I want to help. I want to be part of the solution and move the conversation forward. And I think I may have a platform or an area where we could have that conversation. Are you interested? Anthony, from your point of view, his response was, yeah, absolutely. You wanted to have that. And that's what got us here. So we could have this open conversation. Anything you want to add, Anthony?
Yeah, I was telling Coach Roberts, I think that was one of the first things, like, I really appreciated him reaching out. That was one of the things he said, hey, I just want to say, da, 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 da. And I think that was super, like, it was way, like, it wasn't like we're as in it we are, like, right at the beginning. He's like, hey, and I told him that, there's some things that where I super appreciated it, like, more than I admitted to him. But then there was some stuff that was like, it's still not a place where I'm 100% comfortable being vulnerable. I think a lot of times, as men in general, it's hard to have a place where we can be vulnerable. And specifically as a Black man, like, I pretty much have my guard up 90% of the time. And so even when he reached out, I know it was a good place. And I think it became very obvious because he reached out. There's a couple people that reached out. And it wasn't until later on in the evening, I just happened to be talking to another person I went to high school with. And we weren't even talking about any of the stuff. We were talking about business, because he does business as well. And then somehow it transitioned. And I think both of us were able to really get comfortable and have that sigh of relief. And I think we both acknowledged that it was great for us to have that comfortable, safe place. Even though we definitely appreciated, people reaching out, it was kind of hard to fully, like, know what to tell at the time. Say, hey, I don't really know what to say, because for me, I don't want to make my problems somebody else's problems, and so I don't want to just dump. And especially, if I'm still trying to figure out, like, what you can help with or what you're prepared to help with or any of those things. You know what I mean? So I super appreciated it. And I do want to tell you again, I really appreciate that.
No, that was my pleasure, and it came from caring. I thought about it only on the level of wanting to make sure that you were okay, right? And to check through that. And I think that's what, to me, feels like we were lacking in society as a whole, from my perspective, right? Like, both sides, I felt like there wasn't enough of, like, care and love of just, how do we move forward and have that conversation? And what was your feeling at the beginning of when this was brought to life with George Floyd?
I think I think the big thing is, like, I think there's so much confusion, right? I think there's so many things, and that's not even just with this, but there's so many things to where you can pick apart, right? You can say, oh, well, this person was, none of us were there in that situation. We don't know anything about, besides what we saw in the video. And so there was so much conversation around that particular event, where it's like, okay, this was right, this was wrong. What about the character of this person? What about this? And I think in general, when I see, I try to stay out of it. I try not to look at those things, because I know that, like I said, we walk around carrying a guard, and then when you look at some of those situations, I look at that situation and say, like, that could be me. I know that I've had a gun pulled on me. I had a scenario, which is super ironic. I actually just had a closing a little while ago with a client, but a year or so ago, we were playing flag football, and I was going to go meet, and literally I'm driving around. I'm in real estate, and I had just switched out of my, at the time, I always wore bow ties. I wore bow ties, I suited up, like, the whole shebang. And I'm driving, but I switched out because I'm about to go play flag football. I'm driving. Now, in San Antonio, the east side is not the best area, but it's like the southeast side where we're going to go and we're practicing. And I'm driving, and at the time, I have this beat up Cadillac that it's just not, I get it. But I'm driving, we're going down there, and a police officer literally pulls up behind me. He comes up beside me, and then I make a right turn. He makes a right turn from the left lane. And so then he pulls over behind me, and when he comes up to the car, like, he came up to the car with the gun drawn. And I'm like, what in the world? And in that moment, I'm literally, like, I'm trying to look and, like, go through the process and say, hey, look, I'm a good guy. And so in the process of it, like, I casually mentioned that I'm a real estate agent, so I can, like, and I even, like, I grabbed my business. I just happened to have a business card right here on the console, so I grabbed the business card to show them. But in that moment, it was like, and so when I see stuff like that, I realize, and that's when you kind of look at that and say, hey, you know what, that really could have been me. And there are other situations, and I'm the type of person that says, what could you do differently? And so I don't really, like, I take blame for everything in my world. I try to take blame for everything. Like, what can I do differently? And there's some situations where you kind of feel powerless. And, you know, and in that same area, about a year ago, Philando Castillo, that was one that broke me down because I literally watched that video and said, I think this guy did everything he was supposed to do. He was a gun carrying. He let them know he was gun carrying. He did all that stuff, and he got shot. And he was killed on Facebook. And so for me, I look at that one really, really, really broke me down. And so I generally try to stay away from it. And so I think a lot of time with the conversation around a lot of this has mostly been like around that particular incident. And so people say, well, that particular incident. And I think it's just a timing thing. Like everybody's at home, everybody's at restless, everybody. And so I know that even when you look at the pandemic numbers, statistically, we are affected more than other people even during the pandemic. And so I think it just provided, I think it was less about that particular thing. And it's just like, we're restless and like, now I have time. Like I can actually address this. Normally I look at it and stuff, we say, you take it in the shoulder, you know, it sucks. I can't really do anything about it because I need to make sure I can take care of my responsibilities. So I can't really vocalize and just you get used to it. And I think that's the reason why this particular time was just so many things just fell into place for this to become so explosive because everybody had the availability to really look at it. And I don't have anywhere else to go. And I'm looking at this thing and saying, man, I'm tired. And so that whole situation, I think there's so much confusion because everybody's looking at the different aspects. Everybody's looking at, okay, what does this and this and this have to do with this particular act? Well, it's not just about this particular situation. It's about a whole bigger picture. It's about the fact that I know, and when I got into the real estate business, I know that I was going to have to be stellar in order to be even in the category. Like I'm going to have to be way better than, I'm going to have to be more knowledgeable. I'm going to be more professional. I'm going to have to be like a lot of these other things in order to, and I even had lots of things that were advised to me. Like I actually intentionally grew the beard because I said, I'm going to make my own way. There's some things different, but wise counsel told me I couldn't grow a beard because black men look aggressive. And so if I wanted to be successful in the white man's world, I have to play by these rules. And I'm like, that doesn't seem fair. Like somebody else, if they choose to wear a beard, then they can wear a beard. But in order for me to fit in and for me to play and for me to do these things, I have to give up myself. Like it doesn't seem like, and I understand a lot of things about how these things work, but it's just, when we're looking at these situations, like, it's just hard to put it in I think the biggest thing with all this is, and it's not, it's kind of our American problem, but I think we just don't listen. I think when it comes to, when somebody's grieving, when somebody says, hey, you know, we're not getting, you know, even with, for example, like the feminist movement, like I think we just don't listen. And I think historically, we're just used to being put in a group, right? And so I was talking to somebody and somebody said that at their brokerage, they were putting together a group and it was specifically a black group. And I said, and I know that whenever it's a black group, people get nervous. And I'm assuming that there's a tie to, you know, Black Panther movement and all that other stuff. But whenever there's just a group of black people in general, people get nervous. And so when somebody said, and I realized there's some things that I even have because of, like, I get afraid for this is the way things are. But somebody said, well, we're going to do a Black group, and it has to be a Black group. It can't be a diversity group. And because a diversity group, we get swallowed and pushed to the side, and everybody else is really kind of the thing. And it's so true. Like, when I heard it, I'm like, well, that's really, really true. In whatever it is, sometimes people use like a Black person as a whatever. Like, this is, oh, see, look, you know, look at this person. This is the reason why we can't do this, or we should do this. But then that's it. And everywhere else in the group, it's kind of it becomes an afterthought. And I think that
Can you give some more clarification around that? I mean, I think I'm following you. And I mean, do you have an example of what that looks like in your world?
So, like, for example, a diversity group in general, I know in today's time, a diversity group easily becomes a LBGT group, right? It'll become something else, and it's a part of that group, but it's not really getting any real attention. And I think a lot of times, this was my there's some things that are different. There's some things that I had, like, before I started working with Coach Roberts. You know, I had went through and I had worked with a few coaches, and I had come to the realization, to me, I said, you know what, I think it might have to be a Black coach, because there's just some things that are understood. I think there's some things that are just, it's just different. And it's not because, I think it's just just understanding how to relate to certain things. And it's not that it has to be a Black coach, but I think that there's some things there that are hard to, it's hard to communicate.
Yeah, on some level, you feel comfortable in that situation or a safe space.
Right. I lost my train of thought, though. What did you ask me a question?
Well, I was just saying if you had an example of how that showed up in the world, but I think I'm following. You're saying when a group that becomes diversified or may claim to be diversified, that it moves away from the issue of racism and doesn't become the safe space we're looking for, whereas a all Black community group, whatever you look at, really moves the conversation forward faster.
Right.
Am I following you right, or am I off track?
No, you're spot on. You're spot on. I think that when you're talking about a group like that, I know what I was going to say. I think that there are some things to where, because of that, because of looking for that safe place, I think and that's the reason why I said it doesn't have to be necessarily a Black group. Or I think there's a Black coach, but I think it just has to be, some things have to be understood. And I think that's where things grow. I think, like, in my office, I don't know, I know that in San Antonio, that we are a very small percentage in general. So my office probably mirrors what the San Antonio dynamic is. And I'd say probably less than 7%, right? And so in my office, if I'm trying to figure out something, if I'm trying to, like, there aren't very many places where I get real comfortable in some things, because some things, like, we just know there's a certain way we have to do things, because, like, sometimes it gets uncomfortable for me to say, well, yeah, I do have to work twice as hard to even be in the ballgame, because I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, but, like, that's something that's understood, like, hey, how do we do this, or hey, how do we do this, or this is some of the problems or some of those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a shared perspective.
Right.
Right.
That is perfect. Shared perspective. I like that.
Right, and that's what I'm hearing you say. It's in this conversation, and you know, it's even tough for me to hear that, right? Because I would like to think, like, on all levels we're humans, and I don't have that perspective. Like, absolutely do not. Right, and nor all I can do is listen and attempt to understand. and get that. I also don't have that perspective because I don't see it that way.
Right.
Not to what you're saying. I have a hard time seeing it because my feelings are just as mutual respected agent,
Right.
human being, person, right? And I don't see the other stuff. So you almost become blind to a lot of the things that you experience, you know, on that level. And so I appreciate you answering that stuff. And before we kind of move forward, I want to take a break. Does anybody have some comments, thoughts, questions? Megan, Paula?
I think my biggest learning experience through all this is, like, I don't look at you and see anybody different, and yet I've never seen the world through your eyes till now. That's been the huge eye-opener to me, is I have never seen the world through a Black person's eyes. It's totally different than my world.
And I think that's one of those things that is kind of hard. I have a buddy that he and I used to work at McDonald's together. I used to be his boss, and I gave him a hard time. He took over after I left, and now we're both in real estate. He actually is the main cause for me coming over to Keller Williams. And he grew up on the southeast side of town. He was the white guy that was surrounded by majority Hispanics and a couple Black people, right? So for him, he looks at it, he's like, I don't understand, because like I'm in this situation and now I'm in this situation. And then it was kind of like, oh, I realized that automatically after I leave this group and I come over here, I get a pass. People assume certain things for me that automatically, because I'm not, you know, this minority, that it doesn't take me so long to get to this place.
I have a question for our group, because, well, first of all, I so appreciate you sharing your personal experiences, and I'm trying to think of how I actually want to like frame my question so I get the answer I'm looking for. But so understanding that you're an individual and in no way talking for more than anyone but yourself, I'd still be interested in hearing like your own perspective on, like, when we're in our teams, we have a minority person, whether that's Black or, like you mentioned, I'm in Texas too, so you know we have a lot of Hispanic people on our teams and things. We want to, like, I would personally want to be empathetic to the concept that you just described, right? Like, you can accidentally even marginalize the race issue. And so what, like, you as a person, what would you recommend? Like, how would you like to not be marginalized without also being constantly called out, if that makes sense?
I think there's a way that, because in all actuality, like, I think it's really, for me, when I'm looking at, like, so we're talking about, let's just say we're talking about all this stuff, some of the stuff, and I think I have had pretty much most of the people that I've had conversation with regarding some of the things, like, so now they're changing the Aunt Jemima syrup, and they're like, a lot of these other things that are happening, it's kind of like, we're not asking, like the whole thing with the master bedroom. I don't know if you guys were talking about changing the master bedroom. We're like, nobody cares about that. Like, that's not what anybody's asking for. We just want to be like, I just want a fair shot. I'm not wanting, so just having a conversation with me and just recognizing me as my individual self, that's plenty. You know, just understanding and being, I think, now, I definitely understand some people, because if you go constantly, or, you know, there's some people that probably would take advantage of that. But I think that in general, the effort is still recognized, it's still appreciated. Even if you don't, because at a certain point, like the fact that Coach Roberts reached out to me in that capacity, like, it's kind of like, okay, I know you're reaching out to me for this reason. I appreciate it. I may not necessarily have a response for you, or like, I can't necessarily warm up, but I definitely appreciate the gesture. And I know the fact that you are sincere and you're coming to me, like, it normalizes. At a certain point, I'm going to be comfortable. And if you start to, like, depending on how comfortable we get, I can say, okay, I can feel comfortable enough to share these specific things with you. But it doesn't necessarily, you know, that may not be what you want. You may not want me to share all these different things with you, but at least the fact that I feel recognized and I feel like I am truly a part of the group and my contribution is recognized, I'm going to appreciate that. And I think a lot of people appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Who else has a question or a thought or a comment or a topic of conversation for the group?
So I can also throw out and the reason why the status that he was talking about, I know that there's a lot of questions that people say, like people really, I really have no clue. I have no clue at all. I don't understand. And because of our current culture, just when you ask a question, people want to bury you. And so I really don't get offended very much. Like, you probably have to be trying to offend me on purpose to offend me. And so I definitely want to make sure that, I know you guys don't know me from anybody else, but I do want to make sure that you understand, like, it is really a comfortable place with me. If you have any questions, you have anything, I am very, very comfortable, and this is definitely a safe space.
And I think it's time, right? Like you said, I think the incident with George, what happened was the spark. I think timing made a difference, like you said, as far as just visibility.
Right.
And I think we can all agree with the stories we hear, at least from my perspective. I can't speak for everyone. From my perspective, you know, I noticed a time for change and some things even I was blind to. And it made me reflect, you know, the Keller Williams way is growth and constantly be growing, right? Even on things that are uncomfortable and are challenging, and I may not ever have that perspective other than what I hear and what I learn. So for me, I thought, well, let's have this conversation. And then two, when you and I were talking, what are, you know, I told you, I said, I wanted to ask, what are some resources or some things that I can either be a part of, participate, and or read to move my own ceiling higher, right? And to learn and to get that growth. That would also give me, you know, just a different insight and point of view.
I think I have to get back with you on
He didn't know you were going to ask for some coaching.
that.
Anthony, if you could give us all a little coaching today, that would be great.
Yeah.
I know one thing I was talking to someone else on our team about is the fact that our team has like zero diversity. The closest, I think one of our agents is like half Puerto Rican. Like that's as like, unfortunately, everyone, you know, we're pretty uniform. And we were talking about the fact that we're not even sure that we are a team that minorities would feel comfortable on. And so just trying to figure out, like, how do we change that? Like, how do we even attract diversity? Because we don't, like, we want it. However, the question is, does diversity, you know, want to join us, and how do we get to it?
Right. I think that's, I would say, if you have, like, I know me, I look at certain things and I try to be like, I'm not, but I try to look at things like really objectively across the board. And I know if I look at, there's sometimes I'll joke and I'll say, oh, they don't like black people. And I'm just joking. But if I see a, like you said, uniform, like I saw somebody who had they had a photo of their team, and their team was very uniform, and everybody was wearing American flag, and it was just like, oh, I think the whole branding thing said, now I don't really believe that about them. I don't know anybody, and I'm not gonna like, but definitely I think, how do you brand yourself? I think a lot of it is about like the type of conversations. And so this is where, like, for example, I was talking to a barber, and he was trying to he's a black barber, and he was trying to brand himself as he was not a black barbershop. And I'm like, well, you have a black barbershop culture. Because in a black barbershop, you know, you talk mess about, you make jokes, you crack jokes, you do some of these things. But not only that, it's your terminology. When I look at your flyer, your flyer is everybody, because he had put me on the flyer. Everybody on your flyer is all black. The terminology that you use is, you say, and I said, what is this hair? What would you, because one of the guys is a cosmetologist, and I said, what would you call this hairstyle? And he said something else. And it wasn't a fade, but it was something else. And I'm like, well, a fade, a lot of people are going to understand when you say a fade that you're talking about, like, if this is a Supercuts is going to put this and they're going to advertise this as a whatever the name of the cut is, then that's what sometimes those subtle things are things that start to put you in a category. I said, you may be trying to brand yourself as not a black barbershop, but your marketing pieces, the words that you use, the culture, all show that you're a black barbershop. And so those are the things that have to change if that's what you're looking for. And I think sometimes it may come into, like, if you're looking at, like, what kind of things. So I know one of the things I'm learning is a lot of people, a lot of minority are very, well, not, that's just, I guess it's in general. A lot of people are just uneducated about the home buying process in general. But I realized when I start talking about first-time home buyer and those kind of things, I tend to collect a lot more minorities, and a lot more of those are interested. And so, of course, I know that first-time home buyers, a lot more work, getting credit, getting some of those things. The same thing, we start talking about credit conversations, like working on credit. I noticed that when I start to put those kind of things up, a lot of the interaction that I get is from minorities. And I don't know if that was just, I don't know why. But I would look at, if I were looking to rebrand my, or look introspectively and say, you know, this may be something that I want to look at, I think I would start there. How do you feel about where you are in those things?
So, Anthony, I think, like, you talk about your black barber, and he's putting out there what he knows. And just like Liz is putting out there what they know, and they're speaking two different languages.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you learn the other language?
That is a good question. Can I ask you a question? And don't, like, how many black friends do you have?
I've always had black friends in my life, but they're definitely a minority.
So I think sometimes, like, if you're dating someone, you pick up their jargon. You say, you start to use the slang words that they use, right? Just because of constantly you hear them. Sometimes you joke around with them, and then you start to, like, they stick. I think that would be a big part of it. That definitely helps, where you start to learn the language.
It's funny because as you say that, and all the black friends I've had in my life act like I do.
Right.
It's also interesting because I've realized that one of the areas that I'm working on in terms of my own prejudice is regarding people who speak Ebonics that, you know, it's not correct to speak, like speak,
Right.
and that I judge them for being less intelligent, which isn't the truth. It's just how they learn to speak. And so I'm realizing that that's an area where I need to revisit the way I view people.
And you know what? I think we have all learned that, because I remember years ago when I was still at McDonald's, I was flabbergasted, floored, all that stuff. There is, and I'm actually working with her now, but I remember I had no knowledge of real estate at all. And this lady, she had the most ghetto sound. Like, she talked, you know, Cardi B, she's like Cardi B worse. She is just like, she's ghetto, the way she talks, the way she does everything. And then she said, I just bought a commercial building. And I'm like, what? You did what? Like, and it, like, that surprised me. And then talking to her more, and I'm like, she is actually very educated in, I have no idea. I thought I was smarter than her. I am not. And it surprised me. And I think even one day I had an experience that I learned, this is something that we learned, but I remember I saw a bunch of guys that were wearing, you know, the white beater t-shirts, and they were having a conversation, and I thought, oh, okay, this is, and then I listened to the conversation they were having, and I'm like, this conversation is above any conversation I ever had. Like, these are all business owners, and I thought because they weren't dressed a certain way that they were just thugs. And so, like, I've learned that. I learned that. But, you know, this is how deviant some of this stuff is. Like, it's a lot of stuff to fix it in a year. Like, there's a lot of stuff there's some deep-seated things. If you ask majority of, prior to 2008, if you ask the majority of black people who was the first black president, everybody's going to say Bill Clinton. And that's messed up because he's not black. But I think it was just the whole mentality of, like, because Bill Clinton was smoking weed, because Bill Clinton was doing these things, he was the first black president. And it's kind of like, no, he's not. These characteristics do not make you. I grew up, a lot of them where I grew up, even with my people, I was white. I always talked white. On the phone, I had a lot of, now, it just depended on who I was with. One thing I would say, I don't know the people that you were talking about that you're friends with, that you said they're a lot like you. One of the things that I might question is, are they really? Because sometimes one of the things that we learn to do is code switch. And so when I'm on the phone, when I'm in business, I use my business tone. When I'm not in business, when I'm comfortable at home, I speak another language. And so it's because this is what we're doing to make sure that I can take care of whatever it is I need to take care of. I need to make sure that I can fit in. Now, so for me, there's some things that when I realized in real estate, I realized I could try to make sure and damage some of the stereotypes of what a professional is. I am a professional. In my business, I am very much a professional all the way through. But a lot of times I'll dress like this. And that's on purpose because one of the things that I know is a lot of times the stereotype is, this is a good one, this is not a good one. Look at how they dress. And I don't want to be part of that because I would say, well, I got to make sure they know I'm a good one. And somebody said, well, that's the reason why you're reinforcing that, because they only see good people in this outfit. Then that's gonna reinforce they have to be dressed like this in order to be good. And that's clearly not the case.
Yeah, it's such a great conversation, and I'm like in Keller Williams speak really going internal, right? Because from my perspective, like I hear you say that, and it's hard for me to understand and go there because I'm looking at it like, well, I have a professional voice, and I also have my like relaxed Zach Snot working voice, right? Like I have that too,
Right.
And it's not the same as you. Right? Like we have different reasons for acting that way, and it could potentially affect our business, is what I'm hearing you say
Right.
in the future. And I don't have that fear. And hearing you say that is just, I mean, I thank you for sharing that. I mean, really opening my eyes to a different way of looking at this.
See, and I feel like I think very much the same way you do, Anthony. Like, I feel if I'm in a professional, working professionally, I'm dressed professionally, I present myself professionally, and I can be relaxed, but not when I'm in that capacity. And so then it makes me think, is that because I'm a woman? Is that because I was raised that way? And yet I very much think the same way you do along those lines.
Right. Because in my comfortable setting, I may talk Ebonics. You know what I mean? And that's a completely different, because if I'm saying that, I know that some people will get afraid, or some people are gonna put me in a box.
It reminds me of, this conversation is so good. It makes me think of, what's the name? Camp Tinkergarten, which is like the the thing I do for my little kids, because there's like no anything. So they send you the stuff. And they were talking about for preschool kids, because I got a 3-year-old, like how to have a conversation about why this is so complicated. Because, 3-year-old is like, doesn't get it.
Right.
And they said, like, take some string and like put your arms or your hands together and just like wrap you and your 3-year-olds, like your arms, your hands, your like everything together. And like the example is like you talking about, Anthony, like just reinforces for me. It's like, it's so layered. Like you can't just pull at the
Right.
thread and it comes apart. Like it's just so layered, and you don't know. And everybody is an individual, just like you were saying, Paula, like so there are some things like women do because you're women, and like that's,
Right.
you don't even necessarily think about it. It's so layered. You can't just like unwrap it by pulling the string.
Right.
And that's just such a good reminder, because I'm very like in my own personal thinking, like I'm very linear. I'm like, if this is a problem, you just like cut out the problem and then it's not a problem anymore.
Right.
And the truth is, it's like so tangled, it's complicated.
I also think there's so much that's unintentional, right? And I don't know if that's because of like the TVs, what we're taking in, the books we read, the people we're around. I don't know what that is. Is it the way we're teaching or taught, or what drives that? And Anthony, I don't know what your perspective is. And yet some of the judgments even that I've had that I have corrected myself on, just like you, with like the Ebonics, or seeing someone that you referenced, you said was maybe a thug, but they're a business owner. How much of that is because we've just been taught by that by society?
And that's what I think. I think that part is the part that that's the reality. Like society has taught us all that. And so it's not something that we address. It's not something that we really have conversation about. And then once we take it in subliminally, like we just operate off of it. And there's so many different things. Like there are things that a lot of times, because like even history, there's some things that are in the history book that are part of our American history that don't make the history books because they're not pleasant things. And we know, and we're aware that these things have happened and these things are a reality, but it doesn't, like a lot of times there's so much of a disconnect because like a lot of people have not heard about the Wilmington massacre or the Tulsa, with the, what is it called?
Yeah.
The Black Wall Street.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people don't know about some of these things and what the American, like the U.S. has actually done. And so it just kind of seems like, oh, well, I can get, kind of like, my buddy, like on first thought, I can get up, why can't you get up? Well, there's all these other things that are also, it's layered.
It's about trust.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think this is the reason why I think this is good is because of the fact that there's now conversation and because of the fact that people are getting understanding. And I think that's the biggest part, because a lot of times, when you have, that's the reason why we just kind of learn just to deal with it, because when you try and voice it out, and just like women have the same challenge, when you try and voice it out, it's, oh, because this, you're not because this. And you just kind of say, all right, but then I just figure it out. And within my scope of things, my scope of thinking, then I'll just either put together a workaround or create my own safe place or whatever it is that makes sense for me to go.
I put in the chat box, in case anybody wants to check it out, a website I came across reading something. I forget what I was reading, but like these two friends, one was Hindustani and one was Black. And so when all this happened, like the Hindustani friend, also being of color but not Black, wanted to know how to help her friend. And so they got together and they made this like insane spreadsheet that then they got all this, like when it went viral, they got all this funding to turn it into a website. And it's basically like, if you have 10 minutes a day, here's what you read. And it's like books and articles and resources, and you can pick different tracks. Like I have 25 minutes a day, I have 30 minutes a day. And then it gives you like, it spits out the resources for you. So it's kind of a cool
It is pretty cool.
Like choose your own amount of education.
Well, and we all have opinions and comments and thoughts, right? And everyone believes they're coming from the right place to where they're at. And it's difficult for a lot, especially with social media, has made it so easy for people to put out their opinions without education.
Mhm.
So I, for one, very much appreciate, Anthony, you coming on and leaning into this conversation, and just providing a little glimpse of, you know, what this conversation could look like from your perspective, because it just helps with the learning and moving the conversation forward so we can all win, right? I don't think anybody needs to lose in these situations for all of us to have really successful, healthy families, lives, right? And businesses all around there. So thank you so much for doing that.
I do want to say one thing. I think one of the things that I've noticed from watching, I know that I've seen a sect of people that get so much into, and I'm like, this is not, I think, like the intention is good, but there's a sect of people that become guilty for being white. And I don't think that that's healthy either. Like there's certain people that come in and like, I think that's the reason why some of these things are happening where, oh, well, because my grandparents were this, like I feel guilty about being white. I feel about like, I didn't know, and then it just like try to do these things to compensate. And I think that's not it either. Like there's not really, I don't think that there's a reason to feel guilty about being who you are. It's the same thing. I think is really the biggest thing is getting understanding and being intentional. I think if you're being intentional and you're saying, okay, I know that there's certain things. I know for me, I know that I'm a high C. I know that because I'm a high C, my natural, some of the natural weaknesses are making a quick decision. And so I know that, I understand that, and if I get to a point where I'm realizing that it's taking me too long to make a decision, I have now put in a fail-safe that says, hey, you know what? You probably thought 3 years about it. Just pick one and just work off of it. And so I know that there's some things that where I'm deficient, and I think if we're intentional about understanding this is the area that I don't know, then I have this in place for it. I'm comfortable to have this resource, or I'm comfortable to go and ask questions, or this is where I need to do whatever, you know, I make my hiring decisions. You know, I just may want to make sure that I'm not actually making a biased decision. And it doesn't mean I have to hire somebody just because they're black, but just making sure I'm becoming aware. And I think that's where like the energy is best spent.
Great piece of advice to finish this on. We got 9 minutes left. Anybody have anything else they would like to discuss or final thoughts as we start to wrap up?
I think more than anything, this again solidifies we all see life through our own lens. And it's so important to get out of our own lens and look at life through other people's eyes.
Yeah. I think our culture, I think our whole American culture needs a shot. And I think there's some things that are general because it's hard to even have a strong opinion about anything. Like I think that's one of the challenges of social media. It gives, like you said, it gives everybody a platform to say whatever unintelligent thing that they want to say. And
hide behind it.
Yeah.
Some of the things that were said would not sit down if you and I were having a cup of coffee, a beer, whatever it was. If we were sitting down face to face, I think a lot of the stuff would not be said in the manner in which it's said.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Education is the answer. And the more you know about other people, the more you know about other people.
Right.
We started to remove those types of teachings out of school. How would you find out about it? If you are in a neighborhood where you have one type of religion, how do you find out about other religions? Somebody else has to teach you. Okay, so that's the same thing throughout whatever you're learning. And what we said is, well, we can't teach that at school because we don't want to teach that at school. Why? We should teach more about your culture, my belief, your belief. Then we have more knowledge and more power to get along with people and not be so judgmental. Because how are you supposed to learn? I mean, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so the place I live now is like 4%. 4% is Black. Hispanics are higher than Blacks here. So, I mean, this is like 94% white. Coming from Washington, D.C., where when I left there, it was the ratio was higher minorities than white was the smallest amount of people who were in a minority. So being around people, being familiar with people, and once you talk to people, you can find something to get along. What I could never say, like I'd have a girlfriend and say, how come you talk to me like that? And you talk to them in a different way because you're white. Oh, okay. I got it. Right? I mean, so that's okay. I mean, I'm okay with that. That's something that, but I understand it. I learned it. I lived it. I've been living it for a long time. And I see that we have lots of issues, but I think education is the answer. And we're failed by communities who don't support people. We're failed by churches that are trying to reach out and raise up people who don't have parents. Throwaway society. I mean, what are we doing? How are we handling it? What are we doing to fix a bigger problem when, and I'll say this, I have a story about when I first came to Florida, there was a story on the news about a child in a classroom, and the kid was like first grader, losing their mind, screaming and yelling, and now you know a teacher is not allowed to touch a child. Okay, so you're in a classroom with 20 other kids, and this kid is doing things, and no one is protecting your child from this kid because we're not allowed to touch you. So we get the principal, we bring the principal in, the principal gets the kid out of the classroom into the principal's office where this is a six-year-old, okay, is knocking over the chair and pushing the books off. The principal is trying to get in touch with the parents. No parent. There's one parent. Can't get in touch. So in order for them to do anything to the kid, they had to call the sheriff because the sheriff is allowed to touch you. Okay, so you can't do this. You can't tell me what to do. You can't tell me what to do. They put the 6-year-old in handcuffs. In a 6-year-old in handcuffs, where it should have been in the classroom. We don't do this. Sit down. We're done. Right? This is unacceptable behavior in a society. So now here it is. A 6-year-old 17 years later, how old are they? I mean, I'm looking at education and discipline that says a society needs to have rules. How do you learn rules?
Right.
I mean, we all drive on the right-hand side in the United States. Because if we trust that you're going to drive on the right, you're going to drive on the right, you're going to drive on the right. Because if we don't, when we get on the road and you're coming at me in the wrong way, well, hold on. That's not what we do here. What do you think should happen if everyone does what they want when it's convenient for them?
Right.
Okay, so this is something that I look at as a society as a whole. Is one person more important than anyone else? Should we all have something that we agree on, that we should be safe and that we should do the things that will make the society as a whole better? And when we agree to do that, a lot of the problems that we have can start to be peeled away.
Yep. And that's why, although a very tragic, unfortunate, and I don't want to have happen again situation, I think has some good to it to where now we're talking, right? And now we can agree to that set of standards and have that conversation for the ones that we impact and that we influence in our communities on both sides, right? To move towards that vision.
I think that was a good. I think Kathy said, where if you were trying to find out about a different religion, you read. I think a lot of there's a lot of our stuff that's coded in like in movies, but there's a lot of like our culture. And I think even if you look, like this thing about the police is something, if you all watch now, I'm not a super huge fan of like some of these movies that are like, they're way whatever. But if you look, there's certain things that are kind of a thing. And there's kind of like, you know, your art expresses, art imitates life. And you see some of these things, and we deal a lot with it in joking. Like we can make a joke, that's kind of how we cope and how we deal with a lot of things. But sometimes if you look at some of the movies, like you'll see like, oh, this is actually a recurring thing. I think that's a good way to kind of check out some of these things. Or I know that music is polar because the lyrics are so whatever. But I think some of those things, like really, if you look at certain things objectively, you can really start to see, like, get a little bit more of a feel or more of a comfort level. But again, talking about those people that are, I think I was really just thinking about even to the next level of those people that you feel that you're friends with, that if they're, how close are you to like, I know that my friend, I can tell my friend about things in my, like, we're close enough. I feel comfortable enough. I can tell my friend about things that I probably wouldn't say in public. I could talk to him about my personal relationship with my significant other. I may be able to talk to some friends about money. I may be able to talk to something. I think when you get to that point to where, like, where I feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable with you. And I think that's where, like, I'm sharing vulnerability with you. That makes it a lot more comfortable for me to share vulnerability with you also. And I think when we get to that place and we're really, really comfortable, I think that's where you can get to a place where you really feel like you can really learn. Because when I'm comfortable, I don't only talk to, like, I have a friend who's a police officer in Austin, where he's Puerto Rican. And so, of course, he's in like a super weird place with everything. But like, we can talk, we can have real good discussions about all of it. And it's not like, there's no guard up, and it's not because I'm black, and it's not because he's a police officer. Like, there's nothing. We can talk about everything and say, hey, this is stupid, this is great, this is whatever, everywhere in the spectrum, because we have that comfort level. And I think that, but when you get to a place, if you're really looking for understanding, I'd say really work on building some relationships. And when it gets comfortable enough, you'll get there. Like I said, I can be a resource. I don't mind. I think so much. Sometimes I need somebody to tell some of this stuff too.
I say be yourself. You should be yourself all the time. You shouldn't have two personas. You shouldn't be your professional self, and you shouldn't be your other self. You should be yourself. You should be genuine and real, and you will attract people who are genuine and real. I mean, how does it feel that you act this way when I'm here and I act this way when you're here? Okay, wait, what? I don't agree with all that. I don't. Yeah, I think you should be you.
Fair enough. Anthony, again, I appreciate it. A couple people had to leave away. I know we got calls right at 5:30, so to be respectful, we're a couple minutes over. Awesome. I appreciate you so much coming on. Hopefully everyone found some value on that. Obviously, Anthony has offered himself as a resource. If you need to reach out, certainly can do that. He has an entertaining Facebook a lot of times too, so if you want to follow him on social media, you can go there. Plus, he sells a tremendous amount of houses, which is also important,
right,
in this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Anthony. So appreciate you.
You guys take care.
Bye-bye.
And if you need a referral partner in San Antonio,
We'll send them.
I'm in Georgetown. I'm not that far.
You're in Georgetown?
Yep.
Oh, that's right around from where Ricky stays. My police officer friend.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Oh,
Or I'm in
because I might have a referral out there.
Let me know.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.